The wind had then abated, and toward night the savages made their appearance from the island, going direct to the steamer to Yamaskuna. Then they came to the Spray to beg more, or to steal all, declaring that they got nothing from the steamer. Black Pedro here came alongside again. My own brother could not have been more delighted to see me, and he begged me to lend him my rifle to shoot a guanaco for me in the morning. I assured the fellow that if I remained there another day I would lend him the gun, but I had no mind to remain. I gave him a cooper's draw knife and some other small implements which would be of service in canoe making, and bade him be off. Under the cover of darkness that night I went to the steamer, which I found to be the Columbia, Captain Henderson, from New York, bound for San Francisco. I carried all my guns along with me, in case it should be necessary to fight my way back. In the chief mate of the Columbia, Mr. Hannibal, I found an old friend, and he referred affectionately to days in Manila when we were there together, he in the Southern Cross, and I in the Northern Light, both ships as beautiful as their names. The Columbia had an abundance of fresh stores on board. The captain gave his steward some order, and I remember that the guileless young man asked me if I could manage, besides other things, a few cans of milk and a cheese. When I offered my Montevideo gold for the supplies, the captain roared like a lion and told me to put my money up. It was a glorious gift of provisions of all kinds that I got. Returning to the Spray, where I found all secure, I prepared for an early start in the morning. It was agreed that the steamer should blow her whistle for me if first on the move. I watched the steamer off and on through the night, for the pleasure alone of seeing her electric lights, a pleasing sight in contrast to the ordinary Fuegian canoe with a brand of fire in it. The sloop was first under way, but the Columbia, soon following, passed and saluted as she went by. Had the captain given me his steamer, his company would have been no worse off than they were 2 or 3 months later. I read afterward in a late California paper, "The Columbia will be a total loss." On her second trip to Panama, she was wrecked on the rocks of the California coast. The Spray was then beating against wind and current as usual in the Strait. At this point, the tides from the Atlantic and the Pacific meet, and in the Strait, as on the outside coast, their meeting makes a commotion of whirlpools and combers that in a gale of wind is dangerous to canoes and other frail craft. A few miles farther along was a large steamer ashore, bottom up. Passing this place, the sloop ran into a streak of light wind, and then, a most remarkable condition for Strait weather, it fell entirely calm. Signal fires sprang up at once on all sides, and then more than 20 canoes hove in sight, all heading for the Spray. As they came within hail, their savage crews cried, "Amigo, Yamaskuna, anclas aquí, bueno puerto aquí," and like scraps of Spanish mixed with their own jargon. I had no thought of anchoring in their good port. I hoisted the sloop's flag and fired a gun, all of which they might construe as a friendly salute or an invitation to come on. They drew up in a semicircle, but kept outside of 80 yards, which in self-defence would have been the death line. In their Mosquito fleet was a ship's boat, stolen probably from a murdered crew. 6 savages paddled this rather awkwardly, with the blades of oars which had been broken off. 2 of the savages, standing erect, wore sea boots, and this sustained the suspicion that they had fallen upon some luckless ship's crew, and also added a hint that they had already visited the Spray's deck, and would now, if they could, try her again. Their sea boots, I have no doubt, would have protected their feet and rendered carpet tacks harmless. Paddling clumsily, they passed down the strait, at a distance of 100 yards from the sloop, in an off-hand manner and as if bound to Fortescue Bay. This I judged to be a piece of strategy, and so kept a sharp lookout over a small island which soon came in range between them and the sloop, completely hiding them from view, and toward which the Spray was now drifting helplessly with the tide, and with every prospect of going on the rocks, for there was no anchorage, at least none that my cables would reach. And sure enough, I soon saw a movement in the grass just on top of the island, which is called Bonnet Island and is 136 feet high. I fired several shots over the place, but saw no other sign of the savages. It was they that had moved the grass, for as the sloop swept past the island, the rebound of the tide carrying her clear, there on the other side was the boat, surely enough exposing their cunning and treachery. A stiff breeze coming up suddenly now scattered the canoes, while it extricated the sloop from a dangerous position, albeit the wind, though friendly, was still ahead. The Spray, flogging against current and wind, made Bourges Bay on the following afternoon, and cast anchor there for the second time. I would now, if I could, describe the moonlit scene on the Strait at midnight after I had cleared the savages and Bonnet Island. A heavy cloud bank that had swept across the sky then cleared away, and the night became suddenly as light as day, or nearly so. A high mountain was mirrored in the channel ahead, and the Spray, sailing along with her shadow, was as 2 sloops on the sea. The sloop being moored, I threw out my skiff, and with axe and gun landed at the head of the cove, and filled a barrel of water from a stream. Then, as before, there was no sign of Indians at the place. Finding it quite deserted, I rambled about near the beach for an hour or more. The fine weather seemed somehow to add loneliness to the place, and when I came upon a spot where a grave was marked, I went no farther. Returning to the head of the cove, I came to a sort of calvary, it appeared to me, where navigators carrying their cross had each set one up as a beacon to others coming after. They had anchored here and gone on, all except the one under the little mound. One of the simple marks, curiously enough, had been left there by the steamship Columbia, sister ship to the Columbia, my neighbour of that morning. I read the names of many other vessels. Some of them I copied in my journal, others were illegible. Many of the crosses had decayed and fallen, and many a hand that put them there I had known, many a hand now still. The air of depression was about the place, and I hurried back to the sloop to forget myself again in the voyage. Early the next morning I stood out from Bourges Bay. And off Cape Quod, where the wind fell light, I moored the sloop by kelp in 20 fathoms of water, and held her there a few hours against a 3-knot current. That night I anchored in Langara Cove, a few miles farther along, where on the following day I discovered wreckage and goods washed up from the sea. I worked all day now, salving and boating off a cargo to the sloop. The bulk of the goods was tallow in casks, and in lumps from which the casks had broken away. And embedded in the seaweed was a barrel of wine, which I also towed alongside. I hoisted them all in with the throat halyards, which I took to the windlass. The weight of some of the casks was a little over 800 pounds. There were no Indians about Langara. Evidently there had not been any since the great gale, which had washed the wreckage on shore. Probably it was the same gale that drove the Spray off Cape Horn from March 3 to 8. Hundreds of tons of kelp had been torn from beds in deep water and rolled up into ridges on the beach. A specimen stalk which I found entire, roots, leaves and all, measured 131 feet in length. At this place I filled a barrel of water at night, and on the following day sailed with a fair wind at last. I had not sailed far, however, when I came abreast of more tallow in a small cove, where I anchored and boated off as before. It rained and snowed hard all that day, and it was no light work carrying tallow in my arms over the boulders on the beach. But I worked on till the Spray was loaded with a full cargo. I was happy then in the prospect of doing a good business farther along on the voyage, for the habits of an old trader would come to the surface. I sailed from the cove about noon, greased from top to toe, while my vessel was tallowed from keelson to truck. My cabin, as well as the hold and deck, was stowed full of tallow, and all were thoroughly smeared,